Thank you for coming down. I just have a few questions to ask you. All right. Well, Alex, welcome to the show.
Wayne, it's an honor to be here. Thank you so much for having me today.
I'm glad we could finally connect and do this. We've kind of been dancing around, meeting up at some different shows and so forth, and I'm glad we could finally meet up. A mutual friend of ours, Chris, is who had first told me about you, and it was kind of a neat story because when we first sat down, I was telling him my vision and my dream and where I was going with this thing. He's like, you have to meet my friend Alex. So I'm glad we finally have this opportunity.
Yeah, that's great. He said the same about you, actually. He was a guest on my podcast back in February 2020 talking about taxes, because that's what Chris does, right? And right when we're done, he's like, you got to meet my friend Wayne. I was like, okay. And shortly after, we actually met at an in-person conference,
right.
Which I don't know if anyone even knows what it is anymore, but that used to be a real thing. Like, I shook your hand, like that was a real thing that people used to do.
Yeah, back, like March-ish,
right?
way back.
Feels like a lifetime ago.
It absolutely does. In fact, the world has changed so much since March, I don't even think we remember that.
Right.
Well, Alex, I always like to start with what I call some get to know you questions. So let me just throw a few of these at you and we'll kind of go from there. Coffee or tea?
Tea.
Really? Usually I get the coffee answer.
For sure. I don't like the way coffee tastes. I love the way it smells. Ever since I was a kid, like my dad told me I couldn't have coffee because I was too young. And I was like, I can't wait till I'm old enough to have it. And the first time I had a sip of it, maybe it was just the expectation of what it was going to be. I was like, this is terrible. So still to this day, I just don't enjoy the taste of coffee. It smells great. I love being in a coffee shop. But when it comes down to it, I really like a chilled tea. I think that's just a great thing.
Okay. What's your favorite place, or where's your favorite place to have that drink of tea?
It's funny. I actually live in Jacksonville, Florida. So other side of the coast. You're sending a storm my way right now that people are going to hear during this episode. But there's a coffee shop right down the street from me that's a really small little place, but really a cool vibe, a great place to go and study. Like I started writing a book there that will be finished in 2021, which I'm
awesome.
Excited about.
Congratulations.
Yeah, that's kind of my spot. They know what I like when I walk in. They're like, oh, you want the same tea you always get? I'm like, yes, I do. So I actually don't even know what it's called. They just they know. So, but it's got a great little vibe, and I enjoy supporting locals. Really important to me. So it's a good spot to be.
That's awesome. Yeah, and that's one thing some of our listeners may not know about. They know that I'm out of Florida, but when it comes to summers in Florida, afternoon storms are just part of the deal. That's the way it goes.
Every day.
Let me ask you, do you have a best or worst travel story?
Yeah, I've got a lot of best travel stories. I'd say something that would be considered maybe worst if I had to. Would just be, I went to Canada when I was a kid with my family, and for some reason they let us in Canada but didn't want to let us out. So the kids out, the parents could go back, they said, but not the kids. Anyway, okay. I don't remember exactly what happened, but something with our passports or something like that. But anyway, so we cleared that up. But I'd say best trip, I'll say best recent one. Best recent one, I'm about to mention one that's without my wife. I hate doing that, but all my trips with my wife are fantastic. But this was one that was for work. And I went to Denmark. So it was all expenses paid, a full week in Denmark, working right on the water there in a hangar. I used to do a lot of work in aerospace. So I kind of went with one other guy to evaluate an inventory for another company. So we got to just kind of hang out there. We got to do some flights for free. And we went into the city and we had a good time. It was a lot of fun. Definitely pretty cool. Denmark was a beautiful place. I'd never been anywhere like that before. And it was just really enjoyable to see a totally different culture than I'm used to.
That's awesome. That sounds really neat. And that is something that I think we miss a lot of times too. And who knows where we're going in this current world, because with the lack of traveling and lack of people getting out, I mean, we were talking about just shaking hands at a conference. People aren't traveling to Denmark either right now.
Yeah. And they're not shaking hands. That's for sure.
That is definitely for sure. Do you have, I know you're an avid reader, or at least you've talked about a lot of reading and a lot of that. Do you have a favorite or most meaningful recent nonfiction book?
Yeah, I immediately always go back to the book of Proverbs from the Bible. And I think that maybe that's a common answer. The reason I do that, though, is because it has 31 chapters. I read a chapter every single day, and I just restart every month. I found that most wisdom that I can find in any of their book happens to be in those 31 chapters of that book. So that's a regular one for me. Outside of that, this year, I read a book called Indistractable by Eyal. brilliant. And it's just the art of not being distracted in an extremely distracted world that we live in, right? And
Yeah.
especially now when we're at home, like it's really easy to attempt to do some form of job and watch Netflix, or as soon as you're off, you're exhausted. Because I know police officers are obviously, they're not working from home, and
No.
they're still on the road, but you're exhausted with kind of the way the world is right now. So it's really easy to do that. But he just talks about how to really harness your attention and actually do something meaningful. It was a very good read. He's one of the smartest writers I think I've ever read something by. So Indistractable by Eyal, really a great book.
And that is very relevant right now, because I know
Oh
even
yeah.
with myself, and we're going to get a little bit more into this, but when it comes to social media and all these other distractions that we have, I mean, we are in unprecedented times where we have so much information and yet we don't take it in, and we just can't do deep work anymore.
You're absolutely right. Yeah.
Another question kind of specific to you. Do you have a favorite entrepreneurial story, either your own or someone else's?
Yeah, I think I have a lot of. I love entrepreneur stories. I mean, there's whole podcasts, not mine, but a lot of them are devoted to that. So I just always get so fascinated by what different people share. One in my own life that I'll share, and I've got a bunch of these as well, is actually goes back to my childhood, and I share this somewhat regularly. But I remember when I first realized that I kind of had an entrepreneur heart, if you will. I was a kid and I was driving home from God knows where with my dad. We probably went and got ice cream or something like that. We're in the car and we drove into our neighborhood, and I saw some kids on the side of the road and they're selling something. I'm like, Dad, what are they doing? He's like, oh, they're selling lemonade. He's like, you want some? I'm like, sure. So we bought some lemonade from those kids. I was like, do they get to keep that money, or do they have to give it to their parents? He's like, oh, they probably keep it, which, hopefully,
Yeah, hopefully.
hopefully. I don't know if it's legal if it's not, but I guess it is. But anyway, long story short, I was like, I want to do that. So my mom took me to Publix. I guess at that point we bought some, I don't know, some mixable lemonade stuff. And I just remember looking at the price of everything and how long it took. And then I got paid for the first time that day. I was like, I made like $3. I was like, that's pretty good. I'm like, but this stuff costs a lot. I'm like, I actually lost money if I don't do this like 4 more times or something like that. So like I had
Right.
this math in my head. I'm like, I don't like this idea anymore. I want to do something else. And where I happened to be doing this, there was a golf course right across the street from where we lived. So I was kind of doing it out in front of the house, but I kept on watching these golfers, which I'd never watched before, hit balls into the water over and over again. And they just get so angry. And then I found out that golf balls were very expensive. And I was like, well, I wonder if there's a way we can get them out of the water. And sure enough, we started getting them out of the water. We set up there right across the street from our home and started selling used golf balls back to golfers. And we went from making $3 on a Saturday morning to 3 of us making $100 each on a Saturday morning. And we're 10 and 12-year-old kids or somewhere in between that, right?
That's awesome.
Yeah. And at that moment, I realized that like I loved entrepreneurship. I didn't even care necessarily about the money. I enjoyed the act of building something that would actually run and bring in some sort of income. And I was a super young kid to say that, right? I mean, it's kind of weird for a 10-year-old kid to think that way, but I wasn't great at sports, wasn't great at video games, wasn't a good musician, wasn't good at school. So it's kind of like, well, I think I'm actually good at this. So I've kind of always stuck with it since then. But that's a really early example that just kind of propelled me into the man that I am today, even at a young age. I've always known that I was going to do something in the entrepreneurship realm because of that.
That's awesome. And that's a great story. And I do think that at a young age that it's something you love. For me, it was more on the contracting side. So at that age, I was mowing lawns and doing that kind of thing for people in the neighborhood at
Yeah.
12, 13, 14. And then that led to what later became a different career for me, which was in the landscaping field. But yeah, I think at a young age. I remember even saying his name now is so divisive, but I remember the first time I read The Art of the Deal as a young man. And I loved, what Trump went through in that book and how he described making deals and,
Yeah.
just kind of being smarter than his opponents in the business world,
Oh
which,
yeah. Yeah. He's brilliant with, I mean, a real estate guru, right? I mean, the dude's got it.
exactly. Yeah. And that whole, negotiation tactics and stuff. I remember even, as a 14, 15-year-old kid reading that book and loving that, and How to Win Friends and Influence People was another one that I loved.
Right. Oh
So
yeah. Brilliant.
from there, Alex, let's just talk a little bit about your story, about your journey, what you've done, what you do.
Yeah, definitely. So from there, I'll fast forward many years because everything else is kind of boring in between. I did the whole school thing and all that. But anyway, I ended up getting into real estate at a fairly young age as well, and I was doing on the tech side of things. So now it's very common, but back in 2004, 2005, the 360-degree tours of homes were not really very wide. Like they were rare. Like if you went to an MLS listing that lets you like drag your mouse and look at the roof, look at the floor, flip all the way around, that was rare. It was like a luxury to have that. I was with a company, we helped write the tech that would actually do those virtual tours. So I ended up really enjoying that. I started that when I was like 16, and I had at one point, I think it was 3 photographers and 2 editors, something like that, working with me. And it was a really cool experience for such a young person to be doing that. I remember making great money doing it, having a lot of fun, learning to build a team. I was terrible at it, but learning those things. But during that time, I realized I became very passionate very quick about real estate, because I'd ask the photographers, I'm like, hey, did they add that room later? Like, that looked like an extension to the house. Like, do you think it had a lot of value to it? And just being on the MLS all day, I started like really enjoying not only just doing the job of building a tour, but also looking, okay, what's this house worth? Why is it worth so much more than the neighbor's house? What did they do? And kind of just had this bug planted, if you will, where I was like, I need to do something with this. So the day I turned 18, I started looking for property. And shortly after that, I actually did my first real estate investment and had a rental property that had passive income. And I was like, this is the coolest thing ever. My dream at that point in life immediately became, it's because I saw a magazine. I was probably like at the dentist. And I saw a magazine sitting there, and it was like most successful under 30. It was like 30 under 30 or something like that. And I was like, my name has to be on that list. I have to be there. I now want this to be there. And it actually developed a very bad personality for me internally, which we might get into a little bit. But long story short, I did not achieve that goal, because you'll remember this 2007 hit. And when I was doing,
I do remember,
right? I was doing exceptionally well for my age, to being the most in debt person I've ever met at that age. Like, I went a full flip to being like, oh my gosh, what do I do? And it was a really bad situation. It wrecked me internally, but it actually ended up being the biggest blessing of my life that happened, because it made me really realize who I was becoming wasn't the man that I knew that I should be deep down inside. But that was the next part of my journey, really, was getting into real estate and really learning to enjoy it, but also going through the heartache of the recession, if you will.
Very cool. Yeah, that's a heck of a story. And yes, I remember 2007 very well. Unfortunately, at the time I was in landscaping, and yeah.
Yeah.
And it's funny, because we talk about, and we'll get a little bit more into it, but we can even kind of go down that road a little bit now. We talk about hardships, and we talk about tough times, and we talk about, you talked about that wanting to be on the 30 under 30 list. For me, it was, I was fairly young, probably 16, 17. My dad had gotten me a article that he pulled out of a newspaper. Yes, there used to be these things they printed, they were called newspapers. But he had cut this clip out of that thing, and it talked about these 2 guys out of California that started a lawn care company, 17, 18 years old. And now they were driving around in a limo and had this huge company in Southern California. Okay. And I remember him putting that on, said, hey, you can do this. So that kind of became my goal and my driving force. And yet, like you said, I've always said I made more money and lost more money in landscaping than about anybody. And I think that's important. Is there not a lesson there? Is there not something as an entrepreneur that we learn through loss that's maybe more important than success?
Here's the thing. I mean, if you look at John C. Maxwell, which I think is just the golden example of leadership, right? I mean, he is just really like the standard for it, and he's extremely successful. I actually had a conversation with his staff just a couple weeks ago. They were trying to get him on my podcast. Long story short, the guy, and I love him, he's one of my heroes in life. He wants 20 grand to come on my podcast for 1 hour, and he can charge that. He's not going to be a guest, everybody, just so y'all know. I love him, but I'm not ready to spend 20 grand for one guest on my podcast.
We'll be there someday, Alex, but not
yeah,
yet.
Sure. Anyway, but he's at the point now where he's able to do that, but he has more books on the topic of failure than success. And he says he's failed more times than he will ever succeed. And here's the thing, like, I think that the art of being an entrepreneur, art of being somebody who's actually trying to make traction in your life, means you are going to fail. But as long as it's 1 step back, 2 steps forward, that's okay. You can fall down as many times as you can pick yourself back up. The problem happens when we just decide, I'm a failure, I'm not going to get back up. That's when you've actually failed. But failing at something or making a mistake shouldn't cost you anything. And back then, when that whole real estate thing happened, and for you, the whole thing, everything crashed, I'm sure initially you probably responded like I did, like, I guess I'm a failure. I guess that's it. At least that was my mindset. I was like,
you're right.
I guess I can't do anything else. That's it. But the truth is, it was a setback. And yeah, it took years for me to actually get out of that negative mindset. But the truth is, if I would have just picked myself up right away and said, you know what, Alex, like, didn't work, but I can try something else. I can go do this. I can try this instead. As long as we continue doing that and keep that positive mindset, eventually success will find you. There's something that I can't think of who says it right now, but somebody talks about the people that succeed the most are the ones who are willing to fail the most. So they're ones that just go out there and they'll just keep on failing, but eventually they'll succeed. And going back to John Maxwell, he asks, how often are you failing? If you say, well, never, I don't do that. He's like, well, then you're never going to succeed, because it takes failure to actually figure out how to succeed. So for me, the whole thing was a big mindset shift. I had to be able to get myself out of that negativity. And that's just been really important for me. And I'm a better man now because of it. And I have much less fear in what I do. And honestly, I'm okay if I mess up. Like, I'm not perfect, and I don't want to be perfect. It's
Right.
okay. It's what adds meaning to what I'm doing.
Oh, you are so right. And my story is very similar. And I think that that's a lesson that we learn. In fact, had those failures not happened in the landscaping business, I never would have come into law enforcement. And had I not come into law enforcement, I never would have become the person I am now, because you change. You're a different person in law enforcement, not in a bad way. You just, your
Mhm.
mindset changes, how you view life, how you view mortality, how you view everything changes in
Right.
the
Yeah.
law enforcement field. And it can change you for a bad way, which is part of why I do what I do now, but it can change you in a good way as well. And I credit that with getting to where I am now, with starting this podcast and some other ventures that I'm absolutely loving and enjoying. You've started a few things. You've got a few podcasts, few businesses. You also work in aerospace, correct? What'd you do after real
Yeah,
estate?
I do. Yeah, that's when I got directly into aerospace, because my thought was, okay, what's not getting destroyed by our economy right now? And what wasn't was aerospace at that point. Aerospace still seemed to be booming for some reason, maybe not on the travel side of things, but all in all, aerospace was still a good industry to be in. The tech behind it was still moving forward. So I jumped into that industry, and again, just kind of fell in love with business, like all over again. Like, I enjoyed the act of everything I did. I started as a part-time guy in the receiving department, which more or less meant I was emptying the trash and breaking down boxes for people. And I was happy to be doing that. Like, it was humbling. It was perfect for me where I was at. It helped me to remember that, hey, I'm not above anything. Like, I can do anything here. And from there, I just started. I turned into a sponge, man. If I can, Wayne, if I can just be honest, I turned into a sponge. I just asked every question I could. Hey, why do we always buy from these guys? Hey, why do we do this? Why do we do that? Asking these questions and learning it. And many years later, I guess it's in June 2020, I hit 15 years with that company. And since then, it was a very small company. Now it is a very, very large publicly traded company. Like, it's changed a lot over the years. But I sit as a senior director in a company. We have no VP level. So it's just, I report directly to the president of the company. And there's 6 of us that run this company and make sure that it's driving forward. And that's just from hard work over the years. I've thoroughly enjoyed my time in aerospace. It's been an absolute blast to be part of. But yeah, that's where I'm at full time now, and everything else is a side hustle. And you mentioned like 3. It sounds like a lot, but hopefully we get into that a little bit so I can kind of clear the air that I'm not just a guy who just gets into everything. Like, I'm great at automating and delegating. Those are 2 things that are really important in my life, which we can get into a little bit. So all in all, 2 of those projects are very, very little work for me. And hopefully, like I said, we can talk to that so everyone doesn't think I'm just a guy who's like, ooh, shiny object, I'm going for that. Ooh, over there, right? Because I think a lot of
Right.
people have their hands in a lot of things. That's the assumption. It's like, oh, great, they can't keep themselves grounded, right?
Even though I feel that way some days. So it's always good to learn from guys like you, Alex. That's that's good stuff. And yeah, and I think one thing I wanted to point out was your whole thing on being a sponge. Because even when we're
Mhm.
talking, because I always want to relate these shows, these conversations to law enforcement. And being in a supervisory level now, one thing I see with newer people that come into this line of work, just like any job, I can go all the way back to when I worked in retail as a teenager. And first of all, those menial jobs aren't menial jobs if you'll get in there and you'll be willing to learn from those
Mhm.
other people. I've been very fortunate in almost every job that I've had that I haven't been the owner, that I've been able to move up. And the reason is because you have to become a sponge and have to be willing to adapt and to learn from these other people. And then, like you said, the opportunities that can come with that can be outstanding.
Yeah, you're absolutely right, and I think that humility has a lot to do with that as well. I've never walked into, I shouldn't say I've never, in more recent years, and since this aerospace thing, before I was doing real estate, yes, I was kind of walking in with a bit of an ego. But when I went into aerospace, I didn't have an ego, and still this day, people really enjoy working with me. At least that's what I'm told. It comes up that
Right.
people enjoy working for me. I have multiple departments under me and multiple managers under me. They enjoy it because I don't have this sense of pride of, I've already done all that. Like, yeah, I can tell you exactly what to do. No, still this day, I might be in a leadership role, but if somebody has an idea, I'm going to be humble about it and say, okay, well, explain that a little bit. I'd love to hear that. I'd love to learn what you're doing. And I'm big on empowering others. And I think that a lot of that, it all kind of goes back to that humility. I think no matter what job we're getting into, what we're starting, is to walk in a place of humility, knowing that, hey, I can learn something from virtually anybody as long as I'm open to it. And I always find the people who go the furthest, the ones that are the most humble, and the ones that never stop learning, like never become the master. I feel like that's the most dangerous place you can be. When you're the guy at the top who knows it all, how are you going to learn anymore, right?
Right.
So I think for me, it's always, let me be that sponge. Let me be humble about what I'm doing.
That is absolutely true. And I think even relating it back to law enforcement, like with any career, that's just as important from day one of FTO when you're that brand new deputy and you're on probation for that first year
Mm-hmm.
to maintain that mindset all the way up until someday you're a captain or whatever at the agency. If you can do that, you're going to go far in this career or in any career, as like what you're saying. You,
100%. I couldn't agree more with you there.
Alex, I've listened to your show for a while. I'll be honest with you, I don't catch all of them. As you know, we do run out of
Oh,
time.
that's podcasting.
It is, but I do catch quite a few of them, and I've always considered you more of a high performer, a high achiever, and I've really been impressed on what I hear and what I see, outside of that world when I've ran into you. And I'd like to just dig in a little bit to some of the things that you do. I know, like, for instance, goal setting. I know that's something that's huge for you. Can you maybe walk us into a little bit of what you do that seems to work? And you even talked a little bit about delegation and so forth.
Yeah. So no matter what I'm doing, I want to make sure that I'm not biting off more than I can chew. Right. And I think that many of us, we have an idea of something we want to do and we just kind of go for it, which there's a lot to be said for that. That's better than the person who sits back and just strategizes for the next 20 years of this idea that they have. Right. It's better to jump into it. But I think the first step that all of us has to take is we have to take inventory of what we're currently doing or where we're currently at. So we have to actually sit down. I mean, by take inventory, I like doing this with actual note cards or sticky notes, or if you're watching the video, there's 3 whiteboards behind me. So I like to make sure I actually physically write this out. And I'll sit down, I'll just look at my life and say, okay, what's everything I'm doing? Another great way to do this, a great practice, is to use your phone and just make sure you have that notepad on your phone open. And for a week, just log everything you do. Anytime you're doing something, like, okay, I do this every Thursday, I do this, I do that, all the little things even. And then sit down and say, okay, how much time do I actually have left every day for this new endeavor that I want to try to do, or this new goal that I want to achieve? Can I actually do it with everything I have here? We're going to find that usually the answer is no. We use all of our time. You live all 24 hours every day, right? I mean, you're alive for every second of that 24 hours.
Yes.
And the truth is we're filling it with something, right?
So far.
Well, I'm glad you knew the answer to that. I was concerned.
Yeah. So far we're hitting it.
Right. But so the thing is, we fill all that time, and not necessarily bad things. And if you have the time, you're going to use it. But what we have to do is say, okay, here's the new goal I want to do. I imagine that if I want to achieve this, it's going to take, you have to backtrack and say, on average, I have to work an hour a week for, I don't know, 10 weeks, or an hour a day for 10 weeks. You have to look at your time and say, okay, what can I remove to make room for this? So taking inventory, once again, is what can I actually get rid of to make time for this? And it's a very simple act. There's not a lot to it. But if you're saying, okay, I'm watching 3 hours of Netflix after work every day, I could cut it down to 2. And then I could use that extra hour to work on this, because I think it's going to take me one day for, or 1 hour a day for 10 weeks or whatever it is to actually achieve this goal. Then you can actually do that sort of thing. But it all starts from a place of taking inventory. I believe without doing that, it's going to be really hard to achieve anything, because you don't actually know where the time is going. And it's always just going to be a back burner idea. And I believe this to be true, Wayne. I've seen a lot of people who have great, I'm talking brilliant ideas. They start it and they never finish it. And maybe they'll start something else and never finish it. But it all comes back to the fact that they're like, I'm just so busy, it's going to be too much to do. But in reality, I don't know that that's always true. I mean, maybe sometimes it is, but normally I'd say that if you just sit down and really think about what you're doing with your time, you might have more than you think. And if you properly manage it and batch it correctly, you could actually achieve this goal that you have.
Yeah. I think you're absolutely right, Alex. And I have seen that, because even law enforcement officers, they'll be like, hey, I want to do this. And sometimes it's not business. Some people it is, it's businesses, side hustles, whatever. But for others, it's like, well, I just want to accomplish this or get that thing done.
Yeah.
And they're like, well, with shift work, I've got no time. And yet we never take the time to account for where, like you said, we all have 24 hours. You're using it. I mean, provided you're listening to this podcast, you've been using your 24 hours. So
Right.
what are you using it on? I think that's brilliant.
Yeah, I think it's really important to look at. Really important. I think that's like the number one thing I could mention.
Well, and I think once we take inventory, I know you've talked a lot about goal setting and so forth. Do you then use that to kind of lay out what you're wanting to accomplish?
Yeah, so I start from top level down. So the first thing that I look at is I'm going to look at the actual goal that I want to achieve. What is the end result? So more so the vision, if you will, right? Like, I'll do everything from envision what I think my life will look like once I achieve that goal. Like, I get really practical with it. and really in a place where I can envision it myself, right? And I think that gives you a sense of clarity. Okay, like this is how my life will look different if I achieve this goal. And sometimes it's business, but other times it's really just something recently for me. I want more intentional time with my wife. How am I going to do that? And what are the things that I have to automate? Because, like you said, you mentioned 3 things I do outside of a full-time job. Like, how am I going to be able to automate those things so I can actually get more intentional time with my wife? Like, what do I actually need to sit down and do? So I'm going to envision, first off, okay, the goal is to get more time with my wife. What does that look like? That looks like we can go out to more dinners. We can go out for more walks. We can go to the beach together. We love doing that. Maybe we can watch some movies together. Like, those are things that I'm envisioning. Okay, that is the end result. That's where I have to get myself. And then I begin working backwards from there. So the way I do that is I kind of have the vision, and then I have my big goals, if you will, like the milestone goals. So it's like, okay, here's the 3 things that need to happen. I need to automate daily PS more. I need to make sure that creating a brand is delegated anywhere I can. If someone can take notes for me, then perfect. I can get rid of that. And then the newest thing, Podmatch, if I can find a way to offboard more to a team, or if there's things I just don't need to do, I can get rid of them. So those are kind of the big goals. And then from there, I break it down to tasks. And that's kind of the lowest level is the individual task. Okay, so now I know, I know that I need to not do as much with Podmatch. Maybe I don't need a Twitter account yet. So what is my task for that? Shut down the Twitter account or automate it, make it copy things that I'm posting on Facebook, right? Like very small practical things. And I just break that out and I write it all down. And then again, I already took inventory, so I have an hour a day to devote to it. This is going to take me 4 hours. So 4 days, I'm going to do this. You know, everything I'm sharing here is very practical, if you will. Right. It just does take some discipline to actually be able to get that done.
Absolutely. And I think that's where the rubber meets the road for a lot of us.
Yeah.
You know, we talk about it, we get out there and we get ready to do it. And that discipline side starts to, you know, it becomes easier to flip on Netflix or flip on whatever.
Oh, yeah.
You end up in the rabbit hole, so to speak.
Yeah. And you know, I don't want to ever talk bad about anybody who's doing that, especially me. Like all of my jobs are inside on a computer. Like I'm not out in the sun. I'm not out in any real stressful situation. And for a lot of the listeners here, they're in super stressful, hot situations, like things that are kind of crazy every day. I understand that your mind needs a break at the end of the day. Like sometimes that's all you have left, right? It's like, okay, I need to sit down and just decompress from this day. And a lot of that's going to come into, again, the discipline of how you are really energizing yourself, which we can talk about a little bit, but it's something that's really important we have to do. But I'm not saying that like, I figured this all out. There's people that have way more pressure than I do every day. So for me, some of this comes a little bit easier than it might for somebody else.
I think that's great. And I'm glad you pointed that out because I think sometimes maybe I even come across that way on my podcast and I don't want to, where I talk down about Netflix or I talk down about other things that people may term time wasters, but there is a decompression side to those. And I know a lot of guys I work with, you know, that's exactly what they do. They're like, I need a little time to watch this movie or something, get lost in the script and just not think about all the other stuff going on. Right. I think though it's important that balance comes into it. I think that's what we're talking about, because if at the same time you're spending 6 hours watching Netflix, or we work shift work. So let's say, you know, on one of your days off, you're spending 12 hours watching Netflix and you're like, well, I'd like to get these things done, but I just watched the whole season of Breaking Bad or whatever the new popular show is. That may be the problem. You know, that somewhere in there's balance. Let's do 3 hours. Let's do 4 hours, whatever that is for you. And then this thing that you keep saying you want to do, or I want to spend more time with my wife or more time with my kids or whatever that is, let's work on those as well. Because when it comes to the wife and kids side, again, another thing I'm glad you brought up, that's one of the things that comes with shift work too, because when you get home from that long, stressful shift, the last thing in the world you want to do is that whole, hey, honey, how's your day going kind of thing. It's like, I don't feel like talking to another person and I sure as hell don't want to talk about this right now. So what is that? Would you say that balance is probably key to that?
I think balance is definitely a part of it, because you have to have some balance, right? Because the only thing that separates us from a machine is the fact that we need to recharge, right? And we need to like refresh, and we can't just be go, go, go all the time, like super hyper disciplined and like, no, I don't need a break. I don't need this. The truth is, like, humanity, we're flawed, right? We're not perfect. We need to recharge. We need to chill. These are things that are okay. And it's good to be human, better than being the opposite of that, which there was a season in my life where I always say it this way, I was more machine than man at one point. You know, I really felt that way. I know that's like a Star Wars quote, I think. But anyway, like I felt that way for a little, yeah. But I was sleeping the absolute minimum that I could to function. And I was just grinding from the second I woke up till the second I went to bed. And I did that for a long, long time and never got sick, never got burnt out. And people were like, how the heck did you do that? I'm like, I don't know. It's just going for it. I look back, it's a super unhealthy time in my life. It's just not healthy. And if you can find a way to do it, there has to be some balance involved. and make sure that you're actually making time to live as well. Because in the day, I could be the richest person in the world potentially, right? Or like I could make the perfect system for what I'm doing, anything that I want to do. But at the end of the day, when I'm on my deathbed one day, not to be morbid, but like, what do I have to show for? Like, sure, I might have created wealth, but were my relationships meaningful? Did I do things that I enjoyed? So yes, there has to be a balance. And I think that the best way I've ever heard this said was by Dr. Ivan Misner. He's the founder of BNI, a networking company, the massive, the biggest in the world for sure. And the way he put it is to be where your feet are, which means wherever you are in that moment, be there. And a problem that I see, I'm in the entrepreneurship space, and a problem I see when I'm networking people, talking to them, is some of them you can identify it right away. You're talking to them, they're looking at you, but you can tell that they're looking straight through you into a project they're working on at home, or what they're going to be doing tomorrow. And I think it's a shame. And a lot of us, when we leave work for the day, it stays with us. We have trouble being where our feet are. But if you can learn to decompress, even in the car for a few minutes, think through it. Now think about the next space you're going to be putting your feet into. Okay, I'm going to put my feet in the house with my family. Where do I want my mind to be when I step into this? Okay, I want to be present with those people. I want my feet to be with them. I want to love my wife. I want to love my kids. I want to make sure that I have a relaxing evening with them, right? Think about that, and then let your mind just decompress. It might take you a minute, might take you 5 minutes, might take you 20 minutes, but this practice is more than worth it. So when you're transitioning from one place to another, I found the best way to get balance is to do this act of thinking to yourself, okay, I'm going to be where my feet are. What needs to happen mentally for me to actually do this? And since I've implemented this in my life, I've become a much more balanced person. And right along with balance, I don't mean to just roll right into the next.
No, it's
thing
powerful
here, Wayne,
stuff.
but I think
Keep
it's
going.
really important. Yeah, man. I think the next thing to mention is our energy. One of the issues that we have, and we feel that we need to watch more TV. We keep on giving Netflix all this credit. I feel like they need to be paying us, but any of the streaming services or social media, Wayne would like on the blue line would like a check from
Absolutely.
Netflix. I'll make sure I'll talk to someone there. I'll find them.
Yeah, exactly. Like I said, someday, Alex, for both
right? Someday. Anyway, going back to that, like the issue is that we don't have enough energy. So we feel the need to relax and do all those things. But if we can find a way to increase our energy, we can have a greater capacity to do more. And I find the biggest way to increase energy, and actually something that Brendan Bouchard says, who's I think he is the leading performance coach in the world. And he has a bracelet that he wears that he sells. He talks about all the time. He says, bring the joy. And he says, bring the joy because joy brings energy. So you have to make sure that what you're doing is meaningful. And when it's meaningful, you'll be more joyous about it. And when you're joyous about something, it produces more energy, and you don't feel the need to relax as much or to overextend. Because again, it's healthy at some point. There's a balance. But if you really want to do more, you have to have the energy and the capacity to do it. So I think that goes right along with balance, like you're saying. These are kind of the hand-in-hand keys to being able to just live a meaningful, focused life.
That's powerful. How important is habit when it comes to this?
Oh, I mean, there it is. That's the key. He's setting me up there. Yeah, habits are so important. James Clear in Atomic Habits talks about this, and he talks about making a 1% shift, not like changing 80% of what you do. And over the last 3 years of my life, I've actually changed. I'd say I've changed 10% of what I do, and another 10% I've kind of modified or tweaked. So 20% of what I do I've changed, and I'm producing 100%, probably 80% more than I ever have from just changing 20% of what I do. And it all comes down to the intentionality of a habit. And so for me, it's morning routine, it's an evening routine, and it's some things I do every single day. But being really intentional with those, that is the key right there.
Well, and you set me up this time, because that's actually the next question I wanted to go down is the road of, do you have a morning routine? And it sounds like you have both a morning and evening routine. Can you give us a little bit of what that looks like? I don't want to get too personal.
Oh yeah. I'll do it real quick here, but I have to mention this because everybody, if you go to a conference if you join a Zoom meeting, that's a conference, a digital conference, however we want to say it. When I used to go to conferences and there's like a highly successful person on stage, the question everyone asks is like, what's your morning routine? And I finally heard somebody say the right answer. And he was a billionaire. And he goes, why does everyone want to know about my morning routine? He goes, listen, morning routines don't matter. He goes, what you do the night before does. And that was it. That's how he answered it. And it's something that I knew to be true. Here's the deal. I could have the greatest, like award-winning morning routine, but if I'm staying up all night drinking or watching TV all night or eating like garbage the night before or just deciding not to sleep, my morning routine doesn't mean a thing. Like,
Right.
Wayne, it's pointless to have a morning routine if I'm doing everything wrong the night before. So for me, a good morning routine starts the night before. So really quickly, what I do there is the last, I call it my 2-1-0. So 2 hours before bed, that's when I stop eating. So I don't eat anything up to 2 hours before bed. 1 hour before bed, I get off of all tech, no more work, everything is closed up, no more screens, preferably. Every now and then my wife and I will go a little bit over and we'll be watching The Office or something like that, But like all in all, I do my best to shut down completely. In that last hour, I'm just doing some prep work. So I make sure I make my breakfast the night before. I lay out my clothes the night before. I make sure I'm doing some stretching. I spend a little bit of time in prayer because that's what I do. I go through my checklist for the next day. What do I need to be doing? And then I just do some gratitude at the very end of the night. The last thing I'm doing is I'm thanking God for my life. I'm thanking my wife for the person that she is and just thinking about some things that were great from that day. And that's how I end my day. So it's called my 2-1-0 and it's pretty simple. There's not a lot to it.
That's great and powerful. And I think I love the point that you made there, because so often we get that where people are like, well, it's all about the morning routine, or it's all about this one event. It doesn't even have to be a morning routine, right? It can be whatever one event it is, but they don't think, as you see a lot in diet and exercise, it's like, well, why am I not getting the results I want? Why am I not getting whatever it is? And I've been guilty of this as well. It's like, well, because of all these other bad decisions you made preceding this one, maybe if we start there
Right.
and then do this activity, you're going to get the results you're looking for.
I think a police officer could do the same thing too. When you're arresting somebody, you can be like, well, let's think about how you got here, right? Like, what led you here? Because it's all a bunch of little decisions usually, right?
Yes. My favorite question is, at what point did we think this was a good idea? I've said that a few times. Yeah, because sometimes if we would just have a little pre-thought into what we're doing, it would erase a whole lot of bad things that happen.
Right.
So one other thing along these lines before we switch gears real quick, and I know we're going to end up running out of time, but I got a couple other things I want to get to. I think I saw you post recently that you did somewhat of a social media hiatus, or a social media fast, if you would. I use the term hiatus. Honestly, I think social media is the devil. And every once in a while, I just can't do it anymore. I'm like, right. I'm done. And then a week or two later, I realized how much I need it for the business, and I start doing it again. But can you tell us a little bit of why you did the fast and what that is, what that looked like for you?
Yeah. So it all started a few months ago. I mean, let's face it, we're in election year, so everything that can go wrong and bad goes wrong and bad, right?
Right.
And first off, it's one of those things I knew I needed to change. You actually had an episode not long ago with Ben and Claire. Episode 18 is what it was, where you're talking about like, are you ready for like a new normal? I'm not ready for that yet. Like, listen, it's helpful. So thank you. It was a great episode. I encourage listeners to go back and check that one out. But for me, it was one of those things I realized my heart was going in the wrong place. And it actually all started when I like defund the police. Like in my mind, I don't want to get too heavy into politics. I've never heard something more ignorant in my life. Like the logic behind it doesn't make an ounce of sense. Like, okay, maybe invest in more training for some people that are having trouble. Like, but sure, I don't know, like have more accountability, which I think there's quite a bit. But anyway, it started with that in my mind. Like, I just started realizing I was getting very bitter toward people, because then you see your friends that totally agree with it. Like, not that I have like a ton of them, I don't feel like, but the ones that are like, yeah, get rid of the police. I'm like looking at their posts. I'm like, don't say anything, Alex. Like, don't talk to this person ever again. Like, so it got to the point where I was just like, okay, for my own heart, to continue to love people, which is like that is my number one core value, is to love God and to love people. And I knew that I could not do that if I was on social media during these times. So I've decided up to the election, I'm just going to be off of it, because I know that that's not guarding my heart. I'm not going to be able to stay quiet, if you will, when I need to, and it's better off to do that. So for me, I decided to do this because it's not giving me energy. It's not giving me joy. And if I'm losing my energy and joy, I'm losing my productivity. I'm losing focus on my goal, and I'm going to achieve less and less. And I find it can be a downward spiral. I know some people that are so deep into this stuff and so vested into something that they have no control over, and it's not going to change the outcome of what's going to happen, but they are devoting their full attention to it, and they become the angriest, most bitter people that I've ever seen. I don't mean to talk bad about anybody, but I don't want that to be me. So for me, I knew that I needed to delegate all social media for now, so I could get away from it, to protect where I'm going and the value that I add to other people's lives, because that's important to me. I want to make sure I'm loving the world really well.
Absolutely. And that's, I mean, it's speaking truth. It's not meant to be negative. I've seen the same things with myself. And, you know, you start going down that spiral of, you know, I've got some family members and so forth that we have a great relationship.
Hmm.
But I know that if I spend too much time on social media seeing our differing viewpoints,
Right.
I'm going to say and think things that are not right, and, you know, go down a road where I'm mean and angry or whatever. And one of the things I've been credited with on this podcast, gets said a lot, is that it's very positive.
It
And
is 100%.
right. And
Yes.
that's what you need. And if you're going to remain positive, to those listeners out there, sometimes, and everyone's got to decide what's right for them. But if you're finding yourself in that angry space, if you're finding yourself in that moment where it's like, I need a break, be willing to take it. It's the world isn't going to end. The election is still coming, whether Alex looks at his social media between now and then or not. Um, you know, there may be arguments afterwards whether or not, you know, it was a free election and so forth, but because we're all setting that up, but the election's still happening, whether we like it or not. It's going to take place. So,
Right.
um, good advice. And I'm glad that you're willing to come out and talk about it. Cause I've had a couple podcasts where I've just come out and said, listen, I got to take a break from social media. So we're still here. We're still putting out content, but I just can't do it all the time because of, like you said, what seems to come with it. It's soul killing is the term I use.
Yeah.
Let's go down real quick. I want to talk about a couple of your podcasts real quick. So creating a brand.
Yep.
Um, how important is community when it comes to understanding our journey?
Man, for me, it's everything. I mean, I recently had the opportunity to interview somebody named Shasta Nelson, and she has a book called The Business of Friendship. She has a few of them. Frientimacy is another one. Anyway, she talks about how and I'll take this from a health standpoint, the healthiest people in the world, and there's no surprise here, are the people that eat healthy, that exercise, that sleep right, and have strong friendships. That is the healthiest person on the planet, right? And that's no surprise to anybody. The second healthiest person in the world is what surprises people. It's not the people that exercise the most, eat healthy, and sleep right. It's actually the people that have the strongest friendships, regardless of anything other than sleep. Sleep is number one. Number two has been found to be friendships. The people that have community in their lives are the healthiest people in the world, regardless of what else they're doing. And she has a lot of really interesting stats of, like, she compared like friendships to cigarettes, and they did like the statistics of like how likely it is to impact you. Like, friendship is actually more detrimental, like not having friends in your life is more detrimental than smoking like 3 packs of cigarettes a day or something crazy like that. It's like really wild. But so for me, everything is always strong on community. I mentioned earlier that I got out of that really bad time when I was going from real estate to aerospace. Like, that was a rough season for my life. What got me through is actually changing my friends during that time. The people I was hanging out when I was in real estate were other people that had my mindset, which is, I'm the greatest ever, you know, for lack of a better term. Like, I'm really going places. And I just realized it's not the type of person I wanted to be like anymore. It was very face value. So I actually found, it was actually through my church. I got like a random flyer in the mail, and I was like, oh, I'll check out this church thing, I guess. Like, I went there and met some people that actually cared about me, even though financially I wasn't doing well. Like, I was shocked that people like weren't like, oh gosh, man, he's not really doing well. Like, don't really want to hang out with him. Like, it was a bit of a shock to me, if I'm gonna be honest. But when I found those people, that tribe, to be around, that community that I got myself into, I got really heavy into doing different small groups and things like that. It changed my life. And I watch it change other people's lives as well. And so for me, everything I've ever done since then has always been built around some form of community or connecting people, because I've just seen the power it's had in my life and in my health. And I want to make sure that I'm always doing that. There's a quote by Helen Keller that really just sums this up. And she said that alone we can do so little, but together we can do so much. And I've always just found that to be true. So everything I've done has been built around somehow forming community. I know that's probably a longer answer that you were looking for.
No, that's awesome.
About it.
I absolutely love it, Alex. So how did that migrate, or how did that idea come into creating a brand?
Yeah, so I realized same thing, that people that were in the entrepreneurship space, especially early on, they really struggled with understanding their first or next move. Their first move being even getting started, or their next move, like, okay, I got something, like, what do I do? And I found that coaching is fantastic if you can afford it, but a lot of people just getting started, they can't afford to spend a couple $100 an hour to talk to a coach, right? So the idea was, could we form a community around this where we could all talk to each other? And as we're talking together, can we actually help each other go further? And that was kind of the idea behind it. And sure enough, people are willing to help each other. Like, surprise, surprise, right? This world might make you think differently right now, but people are really willing and open to helping. And we just had some great interactions with people. And a lot of it's been via even just something as simple as email, or on any of the social media platforms, or on our own platform that we have that's community building, any of those type of things that just really helped people. And I love when I log on after a day of being off of it and I see somebody have like a question, like 3 people responding saying, oh, this is what I did. Here's somebody I know that could help you with that. And just seeing those connections being made, it's exhilarating.
That's awesome. And I think that that's one of the things that I love about the podcasting space in general is when you talk about people being willing to help, because you're right. If you listen to the media, if you look at the world in general right now, you think that everybody's divided on everything. And yet there's these sub communities of people that have various beliefs and backgrounds and thinking.
Oh, yeah.
And yet we work together on these things. And just for the listener to know, people don't typically charge $20,000 to come on a show. In fact, people
Right.
come on, people give their time all the time in order to make these things happen. So it's really a pretty cool environment where you have people that, I mean, I've been fortunate to have some people on the show that I would understand if they were like, hey, I'm going to charge you. And fortunately they haven't. They've been willing to come on and say, hey, I'm going to give you some of my time just to help out what you're doing. So it's really a neat experience when you talk about people coming together and their willingness to help each other.
Right. Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And I think that's one of the things that I love about even the podcasting community in general, and the people who listen to it. It's all a bit of a community because there's actually not a lot of people who do podcasts and there's not a lot of people who listen to them overall. Like it's still less than 30% of Americans even listen to podcasts. So it's still a community, and a lot of them, you find a lot of similarities in the people that are listening to podcasts. I guess there's a different genres, but like something more like this, it's a niche group of people that are listening and even producing the podcast. And I think to me, I've always loved the fact that it's just warm, inviting, welcome, like people are welcome all around the place. And I love that. It's cool.
Yeah, it's very cool. So that brought you to something called Podmatch. What's the idea there?
Yeah. So I'll tell you how the idea originated. First off, I'm not really the most successful guy with ideas, like just random ideas. Like I don't have the ones that are going to make millions of dollars, but I found this idea, if you will, this concept that instead of just trying to come up with your own ideas, ask people what they need. So Podmatch was a direct, I guess, like a, I don't know, startup of that exact principle. So basically I just asked people when I was at the podcasting conference we met at, that's when we started it. 2 weeks after that, I went to that conference and I just asked everybody, I'm like, hey, what are you struggling with right now? Or is there anything that's made this difficult for you? And I heard the people that were trying to be guests saying, oh, it's so hard for me to find good podcasts to be on that are like the right ones. And the hosts were saying, I love podcasting and I hate spending so much time trying to find guests because there's gaps between my episodes because I just can't find the right people. I mean, you can find all the random people, but not the right ones. Anyway, so I came home saying, okay, there's a problem. Can I make a solution for this? So for the listeners today, Podmatch is literally like the Tinder or the Hinge, whatever those dating apps are called, of the podcasting space. So it's a program that will automatically connect podcast guests and hosts together and then allow them to do their interviews. So it's a really cool program that just was birthed from the idea of, can I offer a solution to somebody's problem?
That's great. And I mentioned it in that episode, but that's how I met Ben and Claire. That's how they were able to come on my show.
Yeah, it's so cool. I love that. Thank you for the plug, by the way.
It's really cool what you're doing, Alex.
Thank you.
Real quickly, I want to talk about one other project that you have going on, Daily PS.
That is my last one. You've mentioned them all. So just for everyone to know, it's not like, oh my gosh, does he have 10 more? I always like to clarify this. I don't want people to think I'm, again.
You're a busy guy, Alex. That's all I know. So
go ahead.
Daily PS, I'd love to hear. So the PS stands for paradigm shift. Is that correct?
Yes. Yep.
All right. So walk us through a little bit of what that was, designing it, building it, what it is.
Yeah. So it started off just as kind of at that time in my life. Once again, I keep on referring back to the paradigm shift in my life, if you will, was when I realized it wasn't all about money, right? And I had to be a man of humility and somebody who was going to be someone who learns. At that point, I got into small groups. Like I mentioned, I started leading a small group, and Daily PS started as a daily text that I'd send out to people. They were just like, man, Alex, you're so positive about life. You've been through a lot, but you're still really positive about it. And so I just started sending a text. Anyway, that text went from the 6 people or 8 people in my, actually in my small group to 100 people. And I was like, okay, I'm not going to do this every day and do that. And people were asking me for like explanations. What did you mean by that? Can you explain more? Anyway, I sat down one day in front of a computer and was like, I'm going to try this blogging thing. Nervous as I'll get. I've never been so scared of a blank Word document in my life because I never considered myself to be a writer. But for whatever reason, it just really started happening. The whole idea was that, can we help somebody? And for me, I've always found the number one way to help somebody is to lead them closer to Jesus, because he was a great example of someone who helped people. So for me, I just always did my best to just show that to people. And so Daily PS, it's a Christian multi-author blog now. Really quick, I realized that like I had something because there were so many people looking at it. A friend asked if he could contribute. And I was like, sure. And I was like, oh, you can add multiple authors on WordPress. And long story short, here we are many years later. There's a team that runs it. I work on it a total of maybe 2 or 3 hours a week, or a month. Sorry, not a week, a month. And I write on it once a month, and there's 130 different authors on it that are publishing content. I do the podcast for it once a month, and I do a blog post along with it, and that's really it. I just spend a few hours a month doing it, and the rest of it's run by a different team. But it's a passion project. It does not bring in a dollar. We have never brought in a dollar. We don't do anything affiliate related, and that's always been by intention. We want it to be something that blesses people and nothing more. And I've had lines of people say, you could be making this much money with this if you would just do this, and it'll never happen. We've just decided this is a hobby for all of us, and it's our way of giving back to the world.
That's awesome. And I love that. And just one thing I want to point out with the show, I listened to your July 6th podcast that you had put out, your July one. And a lot of the information you go over is so relevant. I don't know if you recall that episode, but you talked about what the biggest problem the world is facing. And when you think of that right now, it struck me because of, we have a lot of problems right now. I think most of us agree that the world has a few issues going on.
Just a few.
But what did you recognize, or what do you think is the biggest problem the world is facing?
It's something I've mentioned a little while ago, but I think it's lack of empathy and love for one another at the end of the day. And maybe that sounds a little too like, I don't know, hippie love and peace stuff, right? But at the end of the day, I mean, people feel a certain way because of something in their lives. I have to believe that's true. And if we could be more empathetic to each other and really get to the root of the problem, instead of just saying, you're wrong and here's why, instead find the common ground. Okay, like, why do you feel that way? Okay, I kind of feel that way about this. And getting into those real discussions, I think that we could have better love for one another. And to me, that's what the world is missing right now. And I think that we look at everybody and we just automatically make an assumption at the end of the day. And there was actually a school that did some study on this, like from a psychological level. And basically, we either look at people as a place of peace because we feel the same way as them, or war. And when we have that war perspective on somebody else, we immediately go into an attack mode because you're in war, right? But it all comes back to the fact that we aren't loving one another, despite our differences or beliefs or anything like that. And I think that that's really the biggest problem we're facing, is more and more we've become divisive. We just want to fight, I think, for some reason, but like, I don't even know how to fix this yet. I know I talked about it a little bit in that episode, but that for me, that's what I'm doing. And that's why I'm fasting social media right now, is so I can actually love other people the way that I should. Sometimes it means being oblivious to what they're saying to the rest of the world on social media, right?
Yeah. Oh, I think that's so powerful, because it's something I've become more and more vocal about in recent days, because that's my biggest issue with the cancel culture. Because in my opinion, it's our differences that give us strength. As long as we can both come, and we've hit on all these, if we can come from a spirit of humility and a spirit of truly wanting to understand the other side. And I do think, if I may, I do think that there is some bottom line things, like I've put out on social media recently, that our differences are our strengths. But if we're starting from, I want to destroy America and rebuild it, we're probably not going to find middle ground, because that I just can't. It's kind of like the defund the police movement. It's a conversation ender. Is there things we can do to reform? Absolutely. We can all get better at whatever it is we do.
Yeah.
But we can talk about that. That is positive, and it's something that could lead to something positive. But if your idea is we're going to dismantle police departments and just, let anarchy rule, well, that's kind of a non-starter. But outside of kind of those fringe type ideas, how important is difference when it comes to these conversations about coming together in a spirit of love, if not to be too cliche?
Yeah, let's put it this way. If everyone agreed with you 100%, you would never grow or change, right? I mean, you would be the same forever. And some of us just want those fans of us in our lives, but I find that those people that end up really not going places, or they end up losing in the long run because they were just around people that agreed with them and were fans with them. And I think it's so important to surround ourselves with diversity. And so for me, I've made sure that I've done that as much as I can. And I know who the right ones are, who think different, versus the ones who don't. Even someone who says, yeah, I think we should defund the police. My first question is, okay, why? Because we need to. I'm like, okay, I'm going to stay away from you because you don't have a logical reason. Someone else is thinking for you. But if someone says, because I just think it's not fair that people are being mistreated, I'm like, okay, I don't think that's fair either. Like, let's talk about that. Right. Let's talk about why we don't think it's fair that people are getting mistreated. And when you can have a real open conversation, it leaves room for people to actually change their mind a little bit or have a different perspective on things. And I think that that's the type of person that I'm willing to surround myself with in a diverse manner. But we have to get away from the idea of cancel culture where there's no reason behind it. It's just, no, this is right And if you don't think that way, you're wrong. And there's no like reasoning, then you got to stay away from that. So for me, diversity is extremely important because it's helped me form into the man that I am and give me a bigger perspective. And really, it's just kind of I've changed a lot over the years. And the more I'm open to that and stay humble to it, just I feel like the more impact I can have on the world around me because I can understand and have empathy for other people. So again, it's fine as long as you start with that common ground and then do so in a loving way. Like we don't have to hate each other just because we feel different about something.
Right. I couldn't agree with you more. And I referred to that family member earlier who him and I couldn't be more diametrically opposed. We are literally the direct opposite when it comes to political beliefs and so forth. And yet, when we get together and we break bread, whatever that may be, it's always a good experience because we can both hold a logical conversation and so forth. So I think that's powerful. What does the future for Alex look like?
And so right now the big focus is going to be Podmatch. So from a work perspective, it's really to keep on grinding forward with that. And it's been a really fun journey already. We launched this, I guess, on June 15th, 2020 is when we launched the thing. And it's really been going well so far. Like we've seen a lot of success. So it's really for me getting into a sales role and marketing role, which is something that I really enjoy. It comes kind of natural to me. So I'm having great conversations with people, doing my best to serve them. On a more personal note, it's to take a step back. I'm looking at some very big changes in my life. And every year, something I do it, a lot of people do this at the beginning of the year. They set like goals and resolutions and things like that. I do it on my birthday. So in February is when I actually do that because that's my new year, right? So I do it on my new year. And one thing I always do is I set a one word theme. So this year it's change. And I knew that some things needed to change in my life. Not necessarily anything bad, but sometimes you have to make room for the great by getting rid of the good. And that's a decision I've had to make this year. So for me, I'm removing some pretty big things in my life that have been part of my life for a very long time to make room for a future that I know that I want for me and my wife and the friends that I've chosen to surround myself with. So a year of change for sure. I think in a year from now, we could have a really cool conversation about how different my life looks, but I'm embracing those things. I actually have on a piece of paper I keep with my to-do list every day and just my calendar, I keep it all in the same place. And it just says good things are supposed to happen to me this year through the changes in my life. Because I think a lot of us, we get scared of the change, but I remind myself every day, Alex, good things are supposed to happen through these changes. They might be scary. They might not feel good at times, but the truth is something good is going to come of it. And I just remind myself of that every day.
That's very powerful. In closing, let me ask you one final question that I ask everybody. We've talked about so many different things and so many great things that, honestly, I think this has been pretty powerful. Let's boil it down. What is the one thing, the one takeaway that the listener can take away from this that could help law enforcement officers or anybody in their life at home?
Yeah, I think that all of us, we want to change the world, right? I have to believe that we want to make the world a better place. And there's two quotes I'm going to give here. One is do for one what you wish you could do for all. So the one person, or for many of the police officers, the many people you interact with, treat them in a way that you'd want to treat everybody. So do for that one person what you wish you can do for all, even if it means, like actually doing something to reprimand them. Like make sure that you treat them in a way that you wish you could treat everybody. And the other thing is love people for who they are, not for what they do. We have to learn to love people because they are people. And in my mind, created in God's image, that is another human being that has the same rights that I do. Love them for that, not for the decisions they choose to make. And I think that if we can do these things, we can really make the world a better place together.
That's awesome. Alex, how can people connect with you?
Man, just creatingabrand.com, you will find everything there. So creatingabrand.com, it's the easiest way to get a hold of me. My email address is there. You can find me on my social channels. I'll respond to anybody, anywhere that they can find me.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate you coming on. Again, this has been a great conversation, and I really appreciate your time.
Yeah, Wayne, thank you. This was an honor to be here.
Thanks, Alex.